The diner sat on the corner of a quiet street in a small town where everyone seemed to know each other's business. It wasn't fancy, just red booths, chipped tables, and the smell of grease that never really went away. But it was always busy. Locals came in for coffee, pancakes, and gossip. Kelsey had worked there for 3 years. She wore the same light blue uniform every day, her name tag slightly scratched. Her feet always hurt by the end of her shift. But she needed the job. Rent wasn't cheap, and her little car was always threatening to break down. Her manager, Trish, was strict and didn't like troublemakers, especially the kind who didn't look like they had money. "Trust your eyes," she'd say. "If someone looks like they can't pay, they probably can't." Kelsey had learned not to argue. She kept her head down and followed the rules. Still, deep down, Kelsey dreamed of more. Maybe her own coffee shop one day, or even just a job where she didn't feel invisible, but every day felt the same. A cycle she couldn't break, in a town that never changed. It was already a rough morning. The coffee machine had broken again, and 2 of the cooks had called out sick. Kelsey was running from table to table, refilling drinks, and taking orders with barely a second to breathe. Her ponytail was coming loose, and the pen behind her ear kept falling out. "Table 4 wants their check," her co-worker Megan said, rushing past. Kelsey gave a tired nod and wiped her hands on her apron. Her back ached, and she still had 5 hours left on her shift. Just as she grabbed the check, the front door opened and a man walked in. He looked rough, clothes too big, hair messy, shoes worn down to almost nothing. His face was weathered, and his eyes looked tired, but kind. He didn't speak. He just found an empty booth by the window and sat down quietly. Kelsey noticed the other customers starting to whisper. One woman clutched her purse closer. A man at the counter shook his head. Megan leaned over to Kelsey and whispered, "Probably just looking for a handout. You gonna take care of it, or should I?" Kelsey sighed. She was already behind, and now this. She glanced at the man again. He wasn't bothering anyone, just sitting there, looking around like he hadn't been inside a place like this in a long time. Still, with Trish's voice in her head, warning her about those types, Kelsey made up her mind. "I've got it," she said quietly, already walking toward the booth. Kelsey walked up to the man's table, trying to keep her voice firm, but polite. "Hey there," she said, forcing a small smile. "Can I help you with something?" The man looked up at her. His eyes were gentle, almost too gentle for someone who looked so worn down. "I'd like a cup of coffee, if that's all right," he said quietly. Kelsey hesitated. He didn't smell, wasn't causing trouble, but he still made the other customers uncomfortable. She glanced over her shoulder. Trish was watching from behind the counter, arms crossed. "I'm sorry," Kelsey said, her smile fading. "We have a policy. We can't serve unless you're planning to order a full meal." "I understand," he said, nodding slowly. "I can pay. I just wanted something warm." She felt a pinch of guilt, but it was buried under stress and pressure. "I'm really sorry. My manager's strict about it." He looked at her for a moment longer, then stood up without a word. No anger, no complaints, just sadness. He nodded again, quietly turned, and walked out the door. As the bell above the door jingled, Kelsey let out a sigh of relief, but something didn't sit right. A man had just been turned away, not for anything he did, just for how he looked. One of the older customers at the counter shook his head and muttered, "Not right, turning people away like that." Kelsey tried to shake the feeling off and went back to work, but the man's eyes stayed in her mind like a shadow that wouldn't go away. The next morning, the diner buzzed with nervous energy. Word had spread fast. Someone new had bought the place overnight. Trish the manager, was unusually quiet, tapping her pen against her clipboard. The staff whispered in the corners, wondering who the new owner was and if they were all about to lose their jobs. Kelsey tied her apron in the back room, trying not to show how anxious she was. The place had problems, sure, but it was her only steady income. If this new owner cleaned house, where would she go? Just before opening, a sleek black car pulled up outside. It stood out like a sore thumb in the old parking lot, shiny and spotless. The door opened slowly, and out stepped a man in a sharp grey suit and polished shoes. The diner fell silent. Kelsey's heart skipped. The man was familiar. It was him, the same man from yesterday. Only now, clean-shaven, hair-combed, wearing clothes that probably cost more than her month's rent. He looked around the diner like he'd seen it 100 times before. He stepped inside, confidence in every step. "Good morning," he said calmly. "I'm Matthew Green. I'm the new owner of this diner." Megan's mouth dropped open. Trisha's pen clattered to the floor. Kelsey felt like the floor had disappeared under her. He looked right at her. For a second, she wanted to hide. She felt the heat rise in her face. She had refused him service. She had assumed the worst. And now, he owned the place. Matthew stood near the front counter, letting the silence settle. Everyone stared at him, unsure of what to say or do. Kelsey stood frozen in place, her hands gripping the edge of a table. "I'm sure some of you are wondering about yesterday," Matthew said calmly, his voice smooth but serious. "Yes, I was the man who came in looking a little rough. I didn't say who I was because I wanted to see how people treated others, especially those who don't look like they have much." No one said a word. "I've been in hard places," he continued. "There was a time when I didn't have a home or a job. People looked through me like I didn't matter. But I got back on my feet, worked hard, made investments, and eventually I found success." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I recently returned to this town, where I once slept behind gas stations and begged for coffee. I wanted to buy a local business, something that mattered to the community. This place had potential, but I needed to see how it truly ran. So I came in dressed the way I used to look, just to see." Trish looked down, embarrassed. Megan avoided his eyes. Then he turned to Kelsey. "I remember you the most," he said gently, not unkindly. "You judged me by how I looked. You turned me away without a second thought." Kelsey swallowed hard. Her voice caught in her throat. She wanted to say something, to apologize, explain, but nothing came out. "I'm not here to fire anyone," Matthew said, "but I will be watching. For the next week, I'll be around as owner, customer, observer. Let's see what kind of place this can really be." And with that, he walked toward the back office, leaving the staff in stunned silence. That day felt like the longest shift of Kelsey's life. Every time she turned around, she expected Matthew to be watching. Sometimes he was. Other times, he wasn't even in the room. But it still felt like he was. She couldn't stop thinking about how she had treated him. It wasn't just rude. It was wrong. She hadn't even given him a chance. After her shift, she sat outside the diner on the back steps, pulling at the strings on her apron. Megan came out and sat beside her. "You okay?" Megan asked, lighting a cigarette. Kelsey nodded, but her eyes were watery. "I feel terrible. I didn't even ask him if he was hungry. I just assumed." "Honestly," Megan said, "we've all done it. Trish taught us to act that way. She always said, 'Don't waste time on people who can't pay.'" "Yeah, but I wasn't raised like that," Kelsey whispered. "I should have known better." There was a pause before Kelsey added, "When I was a kid, my mom and I lived in our car for a while. I hated when people looked at us like we were garbage. Megan looked at her, surprised. I didn't know that. I never talk about it. I guess I built walls. I told myself I was just being smart, protecting my time. But really, I became what I used to hate. Someone who looked down on others. The next few days, Kelsey made a quiet promise to herself to do better. She greeted every customer with a smile, no matter what they looked like. She started offering extra napkins, asking if anyone needed water, checking in more often, not because Matthew might be watching, but because it was the right thing to do. Matthew didn't say much during that week. Sometimes he sat at a table with his laptop, quietly observing. Other times, he spoke with customers and listened to their thoughts about the diner. But every now and then, Kelsey would catch his eye, and he would nod just slightly, like he saw her trying, and maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to change. At the end of the week, Matthew asked Kelsey to meet him in the office after her shift. Her heart pounded as she walked through the hallway, past the kitchen, and into the small back room. He was already sitting at the desk, looking through some papers. "Come in, Kelsey," he said, his tone calm. She sat down, hands folded tightly in her lap. "I just want to say I'm sorry," she began, "for the way I treated you. I had no excuse. Matthew raised a hand gently. "You don't have to explain. I've been judged like that more times than I can count, but I've also learned that people can grow." Kelsey looked up, surprised. "I saw the way you changed this week," he continued. "The way you treated customers. Not just the ones who looked like they had money, but everyone. That matters to me." She didn't know what to say. Her throat felt tight. "I want to give you a chance," he said. "Not just to make things right, but to build something better. How would you feel about becoming assistant manager?" Kelsey's eyes widened. "Me? You have heart. That's more important than experience. I'll train you myself. Better pay, more hours, and a real shot at growing in this business." Tears welled up in her eyes. She nodded quickly, then said, "Thank you. I won't let you down." "I know," Matthew said, smiling for the first time. "Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what we do after." And for the first time in a long time, Kelsey felt like her life might finally be changing. And the better. Months passed, and the diner slowly transformed. The menu was improved, the walls got a fresh coat of paint, and more people from the community started coming in. Not just for the food, but because the place felt different. Kelsey, now the assistant manager, walked through the diner with confidence she never had before. She trained new servers with kindness, handled problems with patience, and reminded everyone to treat every customer with respect. No matter what they looked like, Matthew kept his promise. He mentored Kelsey, teaching her how to run the business, manage staff, and think like a leader. He never brought up that first day again, but the lesson stayed with her every single shift. One rainy afternoon, a man came in wearing a wet hoodie and carrying a duffel bag. His shoes left muddy prints on the floor. The younger waitress looked uncertain, unsure whether to approach. Kelsey stepped forward with a warm smile and said, "Come on in, grab a seat. I'll be right with you." She brought him a hot cup of coffee without being asked. The man looked up, surprised, and nodded gratefully. Kelsey smiled and walked away, her heart full. She didn't need to know his story to treat him with kindness, because she had learned what Matthew once showed her. Sometimes the people we judge too quickly are the ones with the biggest stories to tell, and sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change everything. The diner still smelled like coffee and pancakes. The booths were still chipped. But to Kelsey, it wasn't just a job anymore. It was a second chance for her and for anyone who walked through that door. If this story moved you, Don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever judged someone too quickly? Or been judged yourself? We'd love to hear your experience. Make sure to subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us of the importance of kindness, second chances, and looking beyond appearances.